This is DGMT's Learning Lunch, and I'm your host, Reimagining. Parents and caregivers play the most important role in children's lives. But caring for children and making sure their rights are protected takes the combined effort of many parts of society. Government has a responsibility to make sure the services and systems that children and their caregivers need are in place, such as healthcare, infrastructure, and education. Civil society organizations are able to reach families in ways the state can't through community-based groups and field workers who are present in people's homes and neighborhoods. And that closeness to communities makes them an important part of the bigger effort to help children thrive. Now that South Africa has a new vision for children, how can NGOs play a role in making this vision a reality? This is the focus of today's conversation with Masuli Kama, mobilization lead for the Hold My Hand Accelerator for Children and Teens, who will be talking about the role of NGOs in bringing the National Strategy to Accelerate Action for Children to reality. Welcome, Masuli.
Thank you for having us, Seema.
Masuli, let's start with talking about the National Strategy to Accelerate Action for Children, also known as the NSAAC. This was approved by Cabinet in December 2025, but for those who are not familiar with the strategy, what is it all about?
Thank you for that question. NSAAC, as abbreviated, is a call to action. As you said, it sets a vision that all of society should rally behind. So what it seeks to introduce, number one, is presidential leadership and coordination for children. And number two, a clear set of national priorities. And in those, how do we work together in the sector to fill the gaps, but also identify opportunities to accelerate progress for children. And the third one is to build a combined action through, as you have said, all of society, which includes government, civil society, faith-based organizations, and the unions. And the vision is to support children to ensure they achieve their optimal well-being, but also to make sure they grow to reach their full potential.
Thanks for that explanation, but I think I want to understand whether the NSAAC, as abbreviated, is a government project or were different sectors involved in shaping this vision?
It is a call to action for everyone. So in about 2 years back, the president called on his advisor on social policy to really bring everyone together. So it was the involvement of government through a technical task team, but also civil society partnerships. But there was also a national dialogue where teens themselves had to contribute to the formulation of NSAAC and the consultation, extensive consultation of the sector. So even its development, it's not only a government contribution, but all of society, because it is premised that for us to make progress, there should be co-ownership by all of society.
Masuli, what are some of the strategy's top priorities?
NSAAC, as I said, it introduces about 10 clear priorities. And just to touch on some of those, the first, and which is most important, is that of strengthening families and enable them to be able to care for their children. And another one is around improving child nutrition. We also have one that looks at preventing disability in children and providing those with disabilities the same opportunities as others. We also have one that talks about protecting children and teens from all forms of abuse, injuries, and violence and harmful substances. There's also one around building teenagers' sense of identity, connectedness, belonging.
Now that Cabinet has approved the strategy, procedurally, what happens next for it to be integrated into government's plans and work?
This needs a whole of society approach. So what happens now is it should be all hands on deck. Government must show leadership in including these, and we've seen some of these, in their medium-term development plan, where they talk about extending social protection, where they also talk about issues of early learning in children and language development. But what is most important, as we said, that we want to engage all of society, is to even socialize NSAAC with parliamentarians themselves, so that in their planning process and oversight processes, they are able to hold government to account and ensure that this is included even in the annual planning of different departments. But also, as I've said, organizations themselves, individuals in communities, parents and caregivers themselves need to socialize themselves with these priorities and start to say, what is this one thing that I can do to support the implementation of the vision? So at the level of government, in terms of government processes, they were starting to see it, but we say we need more. Hence, we're doing these mobilization efforts.
Beyond providing a vision and a way of achieving that vision, the NSAAC does something else. It allows us to imagine a different future, and that is a rallying call to everyone that this future is achievable, but it takes all of society, as you said, all hands on deck. So let's imagine then together a future. What does it look like?
Talking about imagination, imagine a South Africa today, where every child born today, the next day and the next had enough love, enough food, enough safety, and enough brain power every day of their lives. And if we were to have that today, we are talking about a prosperous future, because you will not only have children that grow to reach their full potential or children that grow up thriving, but you will have a country where there is economic growth, because we would have invested in children. Investing in children is not about social welfare. It's a deliberate economic effort, because you are increasing the country's human capital. We would have a growing economy that serves all. But what we have done, this NSAAC is supported by Hold My Hand. And Hold My Hand is a national campaign for action for children. We learn from other international practices, where we saw even in Chile in terms of Crico Contiga, and even in Brazil, Bolsa Familia. In these, they had a branded campaign. And these branded campaigns seems to build this powerful public engagement that is sustained, so that the NSAAC as a strategy is living, it doesn't die. We continue to build this conversation. But also, how do we take partners together, build these critical partnerships for synergies, and ensure that together we're able to combine programs to give us better impact and outcomes? But also, how do we mobilize all of society, not only those who are in the sector? We know, for example, unions, in the main, their membership is parents and caregivers, or they are connected to children in one way or the other. So how do we work with them to ensure that parents are supported in terms of caring for their children, and even build interventions so that they are able to access resources to help them care for their children? And that future really, as I said, where we said there's a guarantee of food, there's a guarantee of safety, there's a guarantee of love, and ensuring that there's effort to grow their brain power. It would be really a society where there's sense of purpose and children feel connected, and the country benefits through human capital.
Masuli, that vision is so beautifully simple. You speak about love, food, safety, and brain power. Love means being safe. It speaks about prevention of violence, protection of children in their homes, in schools, and in places where they can play and learn. You talk about access to food, which means that food must be affordable, that communities must be enabled to grow their own food, and that pregnant mothers have enough food to eat so that their babies are able to grow and are not born low birth weight, which we know is connected to stunting later on. You talk about brain power, which essentially is access to early learning opportunities, because those early learning opportunities and that cognitive stimulation through responsive caregiving prepares a child for big school. They are ready to learn. They are ready to read and do maths. So those things are powerfully simple. What will it take to make this vision, as you described it, a reality?
Thank you for that, Rahima. It's all action that will bring change. It is not helpful to only speak about statistics. For example, a stat that say about 80% of children at grade 4, they can't read for a meaning. it means that we must see opportunities to really reverse that. And as you were saying, early learning opportunities come with that, especially in the first 1,000 days. And as Hold My Hand, quite recently we did a survey of trying to see partners that are working in that space, the tools that they are using. And in this, really, in the long run, we want to have a content library where people can be able to access it, parents themselves. Because there's that opportunity where children are still in the home environment. How do we present these resources to parents themselves so that they read for their children when they are still young and read with them to really stimulate their cognitive development and language development? So it's those activities and really using those opportunities. And at Hold My Hand, we're trying to make it simple to say, because we understand that 60% of our children are living in the 40% of the poorest households. So we understand that there are things that people have. It's like even a till slip. How do you even take a till slip and read to your child if you don't have access to books? But we also at Hold My Hand want to have this national book drive. But it's one thing to do a book drive and books are in the home, but they are not used. So how do we encourage parents to interact with these books and ensure that children are really educated when they are still young? But there are other things. For example, the maternal support grant. We know benefits of nutrition in terms of brain development. And this grant really, it tries to fill the gap that is there from when the moms are pregnant and the first 3 months to ensure that they have access to nutritious food, as you were saying. And we think this in turn will develop their brain. So it's all about action. It's all about us identifying ourselves with the priorities and taking action.
Masuli, you spoke a little earlier about mobilizing resources for caregivers and parents. This strategy recognizes the need to mobilize those resources and to support parents and caregivers. How is this being done?
Mobilizing resources is one of the functions of the accelerator. The Hold My Hand accelerator is incubated at the DG Murray Trust through a memorandum of understanding between DG Murray Trust and the presidency. So its role really is to support the NSAAC and also act as an interface between government, civil society, and other partners. In this accelerator, we have about 4 functions. And one of those functions, it's mobilizing resources. And these are not necessarily financial resources only, as you were saying, but how do we mobilize resources? It could be even commercial platforms. It could be other platforms from individuals and companies. So, for example, if you talk about a book drive, and I'm making an example, how could a company that has access in the township, for example, help us in terms of distribution of books and ensure that they are accessible to their home environment? But it could be access to tech platforms and different resources. It could be, if you're talking about local food production, which you mentioned earlier, it could be about how do we mobilize extension services for local food production.
When we talk about extension services, and I've heard this phrase being used a lot when we talk about supporting communities, can you describe what those extension services are?
So, for example, if we talk about community gardens, because we want people, as we used to do in the past, to grow their own food. So if you talk about community gardens, you will be talking about even your seedlings that they need. There's an example where we also visited a local agroecology hub where they have the main hub that has or produces seedlings, and those seedlings will be provided into the different community gardens. But not only that, how do we talk to local economic institutions at government to also provide platforms for market for those who are producing? Also, you could be talking about equipment to assist them with the farming, ensuring that they have all these required services.
So essentially then the extension services is this entire system of training, support, resources that smallholder farmers and households need to grow their own food. Correct. And you were saying that extension services and the provision of that doesn't necessarily have to only be through government, that there are other players that can come to the party. Tell me more.
Yes, that's correct. And I think it's important for us really understand that government cannot do it alone. NGOs exist for that, to support government in its services. As I was saying, there are organizations themselves that have, if I use the same example, that have hubs where there would be farming seedlings and providing those to the communities, even if it's ECDs. So there is a role that can be played by the private sector. I know ShopRite is also involved in supporting community gardens. So there are also other organizations that provide professional agricultural support in terms of how must be your bed before you are about to farm, preparing your soil and all of that. So it's those services, and as I said, private sector, civil society has a huge and critical role to play.
Thanks for that, Masuli. And we know that many NGOs in South Africa are already supporting children and teenagers across South Africa in various ways. How would you like them to see their role in advancing this strategy?
I think the first thing that we want them to do, here is the strategy. There are 10 priorities that have been set. So there's an importance for NGOs to identify themselves against these priorities and see how do they improve. If there's something you are doing already, what is this just one more thing you could do to improve your services? But we also want NGOs to understand that this is not a competition. Let's put children at the center. And once we do that, we are going to appreciate how we could collaborate as partners to improve or shift the needle to ensure that children benefit more, progress is accelerated in their lives. But we also want them to grab the opportunity that comes with what we call the Hold My Hand community. So we've created the Hold My Hand community where NGOs themselves can be able to join to profile the role that they are playing. Because sometimes people do not know about the services of these organizations. And we understand that because of funding challenges, some organizations are not able to have communications capacity to profile the role that they're playing. So as Hold My Hand, we give that opportunity where we, on our platforms, share what they are doing so that not only beneficiaries are able to see them, but also potential funders or volunteers are able to see their programs in those areas.
Masuli, I want to zero in on two things that you said. The first is your comment about NGOs not seeing this as a competition and placing children at the center. In reality, NGOs are competing for scarce resources, for donor funding. So to your point, instead of seeing it as a competition for resources, how can they leverage their participation in the NSAAC when applying for funding, whether funding locally or internationally, if that is available?
I think what is important first is that itself, is, as I would have said, it's a call to action. So there is a vision, a collective vision, and I think now even funders themselves they are starting to appreciate the importance of working together, because NGOs themselves will never have enough resources to change the state, for example, of children. They would need to work with others. So I think that's the point that I'm trying to make, to say that instead, because you have received funding, I want to make this practical example, because you have received funding, extra funding, instead of wanting to start a completely new program that you are not guaranteed in year 2 or 3 if you are going to have funding, how do you look around and see other organizations that are doing exactly that and co-create with them? So that's the point that we're trying to make. And I'm sure that will count, because you would have made contribution and you co-created and would have been part of the implementation of that program.
Thanks for that example, Masuli. The second point I want to zero in on is, practically speaking, what's the one thing that NGOs can do right now to help turn the strategy into real change for children and teens?
This is the call to everyone, including NGOs. Let's continue with this engagement, building public engagement around children and putting them at the center of our national development. But also I think there are two types of NGOs here that I want to look at. There are those that are in the sector already. So I think the previous question tries to respond to that in terms of what they should do, how they should shift their thinking into that of working together to really make impact. But there are those NGOs who are not necessarily in the sector. But we want to say the people they work with, the unique thing here where we think there's an opportunity is that we're all connected to childhood, whether through our children, because we have children, or because we were children ourselves in the past. We need to ensure that those NGOs take that into consideration. How do they support those constituencies that they serve? What is this one thing, just one thing, that they can do to support those that they serve, to care for their children? If you talk about unions, how do they themselves talk about improved work conditions so that workers are able to care for their children? The question really goes back to NGOs themselves to say, here is a vision. We want all hands on deck, as I would have said. What is this one thing that you can do to accelerate action for children?
That's a very good point. We're not only talking to NGOs that are in the children's sector. We're talking about all NGOs, irrespective of the constituencies that they work with, whether they're working with people who are, say, for example, undergoing alcohol and drug rehabilitation, for instance, or whether they're working with other constituencies. How do they see their role in the NSAAC? Masuli, we've spoken about NGOs and their role in the strategy. Let's talk about how they, as NGOs, can actually hold government accountable to the strategy.
We're trying to build this social mobilization. We're trying to create that platform where NGOs must use these opportunities. There are opportunities for public participation. There are opportunities at the local government of integrated development plan, which is the IDP. How do they participate in those? Because we need, for example, at local government, friendly communities for children. So how do they participate? They're ensuring that whatever happens in that environment provides safety for children, but does support their growth also at the very same time. So it's about using the existing systems that are there, but also in their own and opportunities that they have. How do they raise these things and hold government to account? For example, President has, in his State of the Nation address, spoke about ending stunting by 2030. How do we, before we hear the President addressing the nation again, start as NGO to make the calls, ask the right questions around what has happened since the commitment was made, and also what is it that they can do to support government to implement and follow through in their commitments.
Masuli, is there currently a way to track the implementation of the strategy, or will there be a way to track in the future the implementation of the strategy? So we have a global view of where we started and where we are heading and how far we have gotten towards that sort of envisioned future.
We have different functions in the accelerator, and one of them is inform function. Very critical because we have to use data, synthesize existing data. So, example, you do have reports that are there already, Thrive by 5, and other reports that gives you how we're going in terms of improving, accelerating progress in children's lives. But also what we're trying to do at Hold My Hand is that how do we synthesize all this data? And another critical data lies in the organizations themselves that are working in the communities. How do we get that data? So we also need NGOs to be willing to give us that data. Because what we want to build at Hold My Hand is this dashboard that really tells us where are we today, what must happen tomorrow. Because we want to be agile as the accelerator so that we don't wait for 5 years or for 3 years and then get a report. But how do we today get something that is going to inform our next step so that everyone knows where we are, what role they can play in terms of inputting, ensuring that we also at the end have the right outcomes for children as planned.
Thanks, Masuli. Thank you for laying out this vision for the country, for explaining the simple inputs that children need to be able to thrive: love, food, safety, and brain power, and what we all need to do as a collective, as a society, to get there. And now, over to you. those listening to this podcast. Using what you have heard today, you can try this reflective exercise. You'll need a pen and paper to write down these steps or download the takeaway sheet from our website, dgmt.co.za, and go to the podcast section. Write down the following questions and spend some time reflecting on them by yourself, and then share your reflections with your colleagues, your friends, or your family. Question number 1. Irrespective of what your organization does, how can your organization contribute to the NSAAC? Question number 2. What is the one thing you can do right now to help turn this strategy into real change for children and teens? And question number 3. In the work that you do, think about organizations or businesses that you can reach out to further the NSAAC. Think out of the box. This is DGMT's Learning Lunch. Until next time.